The United States is a constitutional federal republic, meaning that it is governed by a written constitution that outlines the structure and powers of the government, with authority divided between the national government and individual states. As a republic, the country is governed by elected representatives, with the most important one being the presidential elections. Although this process has been relatively smooth since 1788, there have been some bumps. Let's explore the most contentious presidential elections in America's history. The United States was founded as the first modern democracy in the world, with its constitution being ratified on June 21, 1788, and becoming effective on March 4, 1789. It became the supreme law of the land associated with the framework of government, including the separation of governmental branches, protocols for federal elections, and the provisions of rights for Americans included in the amendments. While there are critics to the U.S. Constitution, it has proved itself as one of the most influential and enduring constitutions in the world. And many other nations around the world have used the U.S. Constitution as a guide to make their own. The effectiveness of the Constitution has also allowed there to be smoothly run presidential elections where the transition of power is cordial. However, there have been a few combative presidential elections in America's history, with some very recently. In fact, tonight's presidential election might go down as one of them, as American politics has become way more polarizing. In this week's episode, we're going to look at some of the most contentious presidential elections in U.S. history. We will review them and see what made them unique compared to more amiable elections. Also, we'll take a closer look at what has made the most recent elections quarrelsome. Before we begin, if you enjoy geography, both physical and human geography, you found the right channel. So be sure to subscribe to my channel, Our World, Our Planet, Our Home, to view more videos. Let's get started. Our journey begins with the election of 1800, one of the earliest and perhaps one of the most divisive elections in U.S. history. Incumbent President John Adams, a Federalist, faced off against Thomas Jefferson, a Democratic Republican. This election was notable not just for the fierce competition, but because of the unprecedented situation that unfolded after the votes were counted. Jefferson and his running mate, Aaron Burr, received the same number of electoral votes, leading to a deadlock in the Electoral College. This tie had to be broken by the House of Representatives, where after 36 rounds of voting, Jefferson was finally declared the winner. The outcome prompted the passage of the 12th Amendment to prevent future electoral ties by requiring separate votes for president and vice president. Next on our list is the election of 1824, a contest between four major candidates: Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, William Crawford, and Henry Clay. Jackson won the popular vote and led the Electoral College, but he didn't secure enough electoral votes to claim the presidency outright. The decision went to the House of Representatives, where the Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, used his influence to help John Quincy Adams win the presidency. Jackson and his supporters were outraged, calling it a corrupt bargain, when Adams named Clay as his Secretary of State. This contentious election fueled a growing sense of populism in the country, setting the stage for Jackson's resounding victory 4 years later. The election of 1876 was perhaps the most contested and controversial in U.S. history. Democrat Samuel Tilden won the popular vote and seemed poised to win the presidency. But Republican Rutherford B. Hayes challenged the results in three key southern states: Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, where both parties claimed victory. A special electoral commission was formed to resolve the dispute, and after weeks of intense negotiations, Hayes was awarded all the disputed electoral votes, giving him a narrow victory. In exchange for conceding the presidency, Republicans promised to withdraw federal troops from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. This backroom deal, known as the Compromise of 1877, had far-reaching consequences, especially for African Americans in the South. While less often discussed as a contentious election, the 1960 race between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon was one of the closest and most controversial in modern history. Kennedy won by a razor-thin margin in the popular vote, and rumors swirled about voter fraud, particularly in Illinois and Texas. Nixon, however, chose not to contest the results, likely to avoid plunging the nation into chaos. Despite this, the election underscored the growing power of television, as Kennedy's charming appearance in televised debates is often credited with swaying public opinion in his favor. Jumping forward to the 21st century, the 2000 election between George W. Bush and Al Gore remains fresh in the memory of many Americans. After a tight race, the result came down to Florida, where the margin was so narrow that it triggered an automatic recount. For weeks, the nation watched as hanging chads and confusing ballots became national talking points. The legal battle over the recount reached the U.S. Supreme Court, which ultimately halted the process, effectively handing the presidency to Bush. The election exposed flaws in the electoral process and led to reforms in voting procedures, but also left the country heavily divided. 4 years ago, the last presidential election was one of the most polarizing elections in U.S. history. The 2020 contest between incumbent President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. The election took place amid the COVID-19 pandemic, leading to an unprecedented number of mail-in ballots and early voting. On election night, initial results appeared favorable to Trump, but as mail-in votes were counted, Biden overtook him in several key swing states. Trump and many of his supporters questioned the legitimacy of the election, alleging widespread voter fraud. Multiple lawsuits were filed, and several states underwent recounts, but none altered the outcome. The election culminated with the events of January 6th at the U.S. Capitol by Trump supporters attempting to prevent Congress from certifying the Electoral College results. Despite these efforts, Biden was inaugurated on January 20th, 2021. The 2020 election highlighted deep political divisions in the U.S. and brought renewed attention to issues surrounding election integrity and voting rights. Today is Election Day 2024, and another very contentious election is taking place between Vice President Kamala Harris, who was nominated by the Democratic Party after President Biden announced he was not going to seek re-election in July, and former President and Republican nominee Donald Trump. If Harris or Trump are elected, they would make history. Harris will be the first female president, as well the first of color, and Trump will be the second president and first president in modern times to win a non-consecutive term after Grover Cleveland in 1892. Also, Trump would be the first president to be convicted of a crime, as a jury in New York City found him guilty of crimes related to hush money payments to actress and porn star Stormy Daniels. Besides this election being polarizing and divisive, so are the issues. Harris and Trump are pretty much complete opposites when it comes to policies, which has further divided the nation. This division has led to new factions of both the Democratic and Republican parties to become more present on the political spectrum. Politically, Biden was seen as an establishment Democrat who throughout his career was seen as a moderate, but slowly became more progressive. Harris, on the other hand, is seen as a modern establishment Democrat who to some is seen as one of the more progressive politicians in the Democratic Party, although not to the level as one such as Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Trump, in contrast, is seen as an outsider candidate with no prior political experience before his presidency. His ideologies are seen as right-wing populist, and many Republicans have turned their support behind him, but some haven't, including former Vice President Dick Cheney and his daughter, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, establishment Republicans who have both endorsed Harris. Another unusual surprise was when Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a former Democrat turned independent presidential candidate, endorsed Trump. These twists and turns have created a polarization that is unprecedented in American politics. The fact of the matter is that no matter who wins tonight, we're in for a very bumpy ride considering the hostile state of politics. Do you think that more contentious elections are going to happen throughout the 21st century? I'm not very political directly, but I like electoral geography. Nonetheless, let me know what you think in the comment section below. That concludes this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you like geography, both physical and human geography, be sure to subscribe to my channel, Our World, Our Planet, Our Home. Until next time!